So you're sitting there and you try to broach the subject of your avoidant's recent behavior. As gentle as you try to be, you can immediately see their body language shifts to being more defensive. But you know that you're being reasonable and logical. You're only stating the facts. And you trust that your avoidant partner will eventually understand what you're trying to communicate. But you and I both know that that's not how this went down. Things only got worse, in fact. And with every additional attempt at trying to explain yourself, they only became more defensive and frustrated with you. And eventually, you either dropped it or things escalated. Sometimes these situations can even lead to a full on breakup. But today, I'm going to help you understand why your logic feels like an attack to your avoidance sometimes, and what you need to do instead to get through to them. Hi, I'm Gabriel, and I run simplytogether.co with my wife Carolina. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why your calm, reasonable explanations are likely to backfire. And you'll walk away with a completely different approach to these kinds of conversations so they can finally hear you instead of just shutting down right away. Now, I want to tell you about a person I coached, let's call her Casey, who was anxiously attached and was dating an avoidant named Finn. And she kept trying to talk to him about his emotional unavailability. The way he'd sometimes just disappear for a while with no explanation whatsoever, and then he'd come back and act like nothing even happened. At one point, she'd just had enough. And when they finally saw each other again, she mustered the courage and calmly tried walking him through why his disappearing acts hurt her so much. I just need you to understand where I'm coming from, she said, laying out her points one by one, staying composed, choosing her words carefully so nothing would come across as an accusation. But Finn didn't hear someone trying to connect with him. Instead, he heard a case being built against him. And every calm, logical point made him feel smaller. And in the case of dismissive avoidance, they might have just said, I can't do this right now, and walked out. But Finn leaned more fearful avoidant, and he actually agreed with most of what Casey said. Nonetheless, after all that transpired, and Casey felt like it was a positive conversation, Finn reverted right back to his typical behavior, shut down, and pulled the disappearing act. Now, your version of this may look completely different in the details, the specific behavior, the words, and so forth. But the underlying pattern tends to be the same across almost every person we work with. You try to explain something logically, your avoidant feels attacked, and they shut down. So I want to talk about a couple of reasons why your avoidant behaves this way. So check which ones fit for you in your case, and then we'll get into what you can do about it. Now, one of the first reasons they might react this way to your logic, and reasonable logic at that, is that this might remind them of an ex or a parent. This might be the first time you've personally had this exact conversation with them, but for your avoidant, the moment doesn't feel new at all. For Finn, Casey's calm, methodical explanations reminded him of something older than their relationship, his mother, who used to sit him down as a child and rationally list everything he had done wrong, speaking in the same reasonable, calm tone, similar to what Casey used. And to young Finn, that tone was a warning sign because he knew what was going to follow was criticism and shame for expressing his feelings. So years later, anytime someone sat him down with the same composed, logical delivery, some part of him wasn't in the room with her anymore. He was back in that childhood, bracing for being shut down all over again. So something about your tone, your timing, or even the specific words you choose can trigger an old association buried decades deep. And they're right back to being 7 years old, being told off and just shutting down. Now, another reason why your logic might feel like an attack to your avoidant is that they have resentment from repeated attempts at addressing their behavior. This might not be the first time you've tried to have this conversation with them, and each additional attempt has quietly built up resentment on their end. This was true for Finn as well. So every time Casey circled back with, "Let me just explain it properly," hoping this would finally be the attempt that landed, he just felt more cornered and certainly did not understand what she was trying to communicate. And he'd respond with, "It's just never good enough, I can't make you happy," and that's where it kind of ended. So if you've tried and tried again to have a reasonable conversation, then chances are, to your avoidant, this no longer feels like communication, but like pressure. Now, the next reason is one I see being very common with people that I coach, and that is your point is valid, but it's a sensitive point. Sometimes the reason they're getting defensive has less to do with how you're delivering the message and more with how accurate it is. Disappearing for a while and being emotionally unavailable were patterns Finn already knew about himself because his exes had called him out on it. And he even privately judged himself for it, but didn't know what to do about it. And hearing them yet again, this time through Casey, hit an already sensitive nerve. So the fact that your point, what you're upset about, what you're trying to communicate is valid can trigger even more defensiveness and make them shut down. Now, the final reason I want to mention is that they can feel defenseless, small, and patronized when you're taking this approach. So underneath all the three reasons that we just covered, being talked to this way, reminding them of an ex or a parent, having resentment from repeated attempts you have had in trying to get through to them, and your point being valid, but being a very sensitive point to them, are all the same core experience. Because when somebody repeatedly hears calm, logical explanations, even fair, well-intentioned ones, they can end up feeling defenseless, small, and patronized. And Finn wasn't rejecting the substance of what Casey was saying. He was actually just reacting to being what he experienced as talked down to. And that feeling activated his deepest fear of being controlled or diminished by someone he believed he was safe with. And I know this from my own experience as a former avoidant myself with my wife, Carolina. She could very well be right on all counts, but I would reject her point simply because I felt patronized and small. And once those feelings take over, the conversation stops being about the actual issue at hand that you're trying to raise, the disappearing, the silence, and emotional distance. And it's a power and safety struggle instead. So think back, paying close attention to that moment where you were trying to communicate something and your avoidant became defensive. Didn't the air shift, becoming a bit more tense, a bit of a power struggle, where they were almost rebelling against you? And if not in the moment, consider that their disappearing act can be an act of rebellion where they're trying to regain control and power that they perceive to have lost. And once a conversation becomes about power and safety, no amount of additional logic or evidence or perfectly chosen words is going to get through, because you're no longer speaking the same language. So please keep this in mind as we move forward, because this is what it all boils down to. Again, it is no longer about the topic you started addressing. It is a power struggle at this point. The first thing that needs to happen is that you need to level the playing field. They need to feel equally in control and empowered as you are. Until that happens, they will not give you an inch and will find ways to try and take back control. So how do you go about leveling the playing field then? Well, first, you need to relate to them as an equal who's on the same team and not someone who's broken or needs fixing. So coming back to Casey and Finn, this was the first real shift she had to make, and it wasn't easy, because everything in her wanted to sit Finn down and walk him through his behavior and kind of coach or parent him. But every time she approached him that way, even with love behind it and good intentions, it positioned her as the one who had it all figured out and him as the problem child. So working together as a team means you approach the conversation shoulder to shoulder. The two of you look at the problem together rather than you looking at your avoidant as the problem. Instead of "you need to stop disappearing on me," Casey eventually learned to say something closer to "I think we just keep running into the same wall. Can we figure this out together?" And just that shift in her approach from trying to correct his behavior to partnering up with him changed the entire vibe to a positive and uplifting one before she'd even gotten to the actual issue. So once you've started leveling out the playing field by relating to them as an equal, you need to start leading with I statements instead of potential accusations or something they can interpret as an accusation. "Why do you disappear like that and pretend like nothing happened?" becomes "I felt really scared last week when you went quiet for 10 days. Notice the difference? "Why do you disappear like that and pretend like nothing happened later?" is you having power and control. Meanwhile, "I felt really scared last week when you went quiet for 10 days is you not in control. And it equalizes the power dynamic between the two of you. And also notice that there's no accusation buried inside this statement. There's just a feeling being expressed, "I felt scared," and a moment being referred to, "when we didn't speak for 10 days." So because of this, they are far more likely to receive what you're saying positively and might even want to comfort you right away. And when Casey said this version to Finn, his whole posture softened in a way that she hadn't seen in months. And he even said, "I didn't know you felt scared. I thought you were just mad at me. And honestly, you being mad is what I expected. So I was preempting that." So leveling the playing field, working as a team, and speaking from vulnerability will get you much further in building that happy relationship with them that you know is possible. And that is exactly what we walk people through inside our attach and avoidant program. Because Finn's specific struggle, going quiet, disappearing whenever things got emotionally heavy, is one of the most common patterns we see in avoidant partners. And knowing how to deal with those moments is a crucial relationship skill. You can learn more about our program by clicking the link in the video description below. Now, Casey learned to approach Finn as a partner instead of a problem. And that changed everything about how their conversation started and how they ended. But there's a deeper question sitting underneath all of this that we haven't quite touched on yet. And that is, how much patience does this actually take? And where is the line before patience turns into something that hurts you instead of helping them? If you can relate to this problem, you can watch Your Patience is Our Greatest Hope next, where I also discuss when you should stop being patient. You can click right here to watch that.